Well, hi again, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, I Want Your Job, where we'll be talking with professional musician Julian Smiles. My name's Tara Smith, and I'll be your host for this evening. I'm a proud alumni of UNSW, having studied music and education there, graduating in 2001. Since then, I've had numerous roles in music and arts education in both Australia and the UK, with my most recent being Director of Learning and Engagement at the Australian Chamber Orchestra. I'm really passionate about developing young and emerging talent, so I'm thrilled to be hosting this conversation tonight with Julian. Before we go any further, I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation on whose lands I'm sitting today, and the Bedigal people on whose lands UNSW stands. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us for this session tonight. I acknowledge, particularly during this NAIDOC week, that this was and always will be Aboriginal land. So tonight's session will run for about 45 minutes. Julian and I are going to have a conversation about his pathway and his career as a professional musician, which I hope is going to be enlightening. And we'll be sure to leave 10 minutes at the end of the session for any questions that you have. Feel free to have your cameras on if you like or off, but please do keep your microphones on mute. If you do have questions or comments, please type them into the chat function. We have Alex from the Music Performance Unit and Zia, your SOAP representative, online with us, and they'll assist with any technical issues and moderate the chat questions for us. So I'll come back to Zia towards the end and she can facilitate any questions you have that come up during the session. Okay. On to Julian. I'm just going to introduce Julian Smiles, who I'm sure needs no introduction, hopefully not, but he has over 30 years been one of Australia's most preeminent cellists. On graduating from the Canberra School of Music at the age of 19, he was appointed principal cellist with the Australian Chamber Orchestra and rapidly gained prominence as a chamber musician. In 1991, he was invited to join the Australian Ensemble at UNSW, and in 1995, he formed the Goldner String Quartet with colleagues Dean Olding, Dimity Hall and Irina Morozova. With these two chamber groups, he has performed to critical acclaim at major venues and festivals throughout the world, recorded over 30 albums on leading labels and premiered many works by Australian and international composers. Alongside his chamber music career, Julian is active as a soloist and has performed many concertos with major orchestras. In 2018, Julian's high standing as a performer was recognised by the Canberra Symphony Orchestra as their inaugural Artist in Focus, in which role he has performed recitals and appeared as soloist with the orchestra. He has also premiered works for solo cello by eminent Australian composers such as Carl Vine, Mark Isaacs and Ross Edwards. Julian is also well regarded as an educator and has developed a system of cello playing based on thorough and ongoing analysis of musical and technical issues that sees him sought after as a teacher and chamber music coach. He has held teaching positions at the Australian Institute of Music, at the Canberra School of Music, and is currently senior lecturer and coordinator of cello at the Sydney Conservatorium of Music. So hi, Julian.
Hi, Tara. How are you?
Good, thank you. How are you? Do you want to make us jealous to tell us where you are right now?
Yes, I'm actually 3 hours south of Sydney at a place called Mollymook, and I must hasten to add that I came down here more than 2 weeks ago, so I wasn't flouting any regulations. And I might also add that the country here is the traditional home of the Badawang people of the Yuin Nation.
Great. Well, it looks lovely and cosy. We wish you were there. And welcome to everyone else who's probably sitting in lockdown. So it's great that we can connect with you via Zoom for this session and keep everyone inspired while I know that you can't rehearse at the moment. So I'm going to start with some questions for you. Can we start at the start and tell us about young Julian, the developing musician, where you grew up, where you went to school, when did you start playing? Tell us a bit about that.
I grew up in Canberra. The crucial thing, I think, for me was that I grew up in a very musical family. My mother was an amateur pianist, but a very good one, and she actually did a lot of professional work in Canberra. So our house was always full of music, and I was the youngest of three children, in fact, and music permeated our house, and it was sort of natural that I was going to take up an instrument of some description. And purely by accident, they started an elementary string program at the Canberra School of Music, my mum said, would you be interested in that? I was about 13 years old. I said, yeah, I'll try anything. And we went in, and these three guys that seemed very old to me, but were probably about my age now, looked at me and said, yeah, he's a cellist. So they gave me a cello, and it clicked. And I haven't looked back. I found that from the very beginning that it was very clear to me that I enjoyed the instrument very much, and that I was good at it, especially if I tried hard, which is a sort of a healthy attitude to take from the very beginning.
And so you started at 13, and then what was your study path from there? Were you at just a normal high school, or when did you sort of kick into studying music more seriously, and where did you study then after high school?
Well, the elementary string program was a new initiative of the Canberra School of Music at the time, and that sort of channeled into another program they had, which was in year 11 and 12 of high school in the ACT. They had what they called the preparatory course, which you could do a series of subjects at the conservatorium, including your principal study instrument, and your marks in those subjects would be accredited to your tertiary entrance score through the school system. So my focus was very much on that, even though I was also going to a normal high school and a college. Yeah, so that sort of naturally, as it self-describes, prepared me to go into the Bachelor of Music degree at the Canberra School of Music. I was learning at the time from a very fine cello teacher by the name of Nelson Cook, who's very famous and produced a lot of very fine players. For example, Li Wei Chin is a name that a lot of people would know. Howard Penny, who's a teacher down in Annam. Sue Ellen Paulson, I believe, studied with him for a little while. So yes, he had a pedigree of producing very fine players, and so I started with him. I learned from him from the age of 13. I learned from him through high school, and then I went into the Bachelor of Music degree with him. By that time, I'd been learning with him for about 7 years, and he and I both felt that we'd worked together probably long enough, and we should be sort of planning ahead for my potential overseas travel. So I did an accelerated progress through that Bachelor of Music degree. Normally it should take 4 years, but I did it in 2, which was somewhat of an achievement. And I don't know whether they'd let people do that now, but there was a mechanism by which my long period of studies at the conservatorium was recognised. And yeah, I got out of there as quickly as I could.
Right. And then did you go overseas then, or what was the next step?
I didn't go immediately. I was fortunate enough that towards the end of my studies, I started being noticed by professional musicians around the country, principally in chamber music, actually. And I got picked up to play some chamber music with Kathy Selby, the pianist. She was setting up a chamber music series, and a mutual friend of ours, Charmian Gadd, who was a violin teacher in Canberra and actually was married to Richard Goldner, after whom the Goldner Quartet is named. Charmian was very supportive of me, and she introduced me to Kathy Selby, and Kathy Selby had me play in her chamber music series in Sydney, and that was when I met Dean Olding and Irena Morozova and people like that. And the other thing that happened at that point was that just before the end of my studies, the position of principal cello with the Australian Chamber Orchestra became vacant. And I auditioned for that and got the job when I was about 19 years old. So that was very exciting for me. And that immediately gave me a professional position, which took me up to Sydney. And then sometime during that year, the first year that I was with the ACO, I was invited to go and study overseas with Janos Starker, who was a very famous cello teacher that, you know, everybody in the world tried to get to study with him. And purely by accident, again, he I played for him, and he thought it was an audition, and I thought it was a masterclass. And because he thought it was an audition, he said, "Right, I'll see you when you're finished." So that was great. So I went over and studied with him for a year and learned a hell of a lot. It was good because it came from a completely different angle to the teaching that I had previously had from Nelson. And yeah, so I studied with Starker for a year. And during that year, I was invited to join the Australian Ensemble because the position of cello with that group became vacant at the same time. So all these little maneuvers that set me up where I am now happened very quickly over about a 2-year period, and took a lot of decision making away from me in a sense. I had to consider whether I would accept these invitations, but people who are smarter than me, whose advice I asked, said, "Yeah, you should do it. You'll gain a lot out of playing chamber music at this very high level with this very fine group of musicians."
And so did you have a plan for that career early on, or how did that career path take shape, and how did you end up in chamber music? Did you always know that's what you wanted, or was it just that those opportunities came up? Was there ever a consideration of playing in a symphony orchestra? How did your career path kind of find itself?
Yeah, I think, look, my successes when I was young, the age of 14, 15, 16, were what you would describe as prodigious. So I was winning national competitions when I was 15, 16 and younger. And because of that, I sort of felt like, I'm a superstar. I'm going to, be a soloist. That was the natural progression for me. When you're that sort of age, you don't have a realistic appreciation of the rareness of a solo career, the almost impossibility of it, in fact. And that's something that luckily I didn't sort of find myself following that dream and being forced into following that dream, and then there would have been the inevitable realization that I had to have a job at some point, because the jobs with the ACO first of all, and then the Australian Ensemble came across my path, and in both occasions it was obviously a very good job to have, and that sort of steered me into the chamber music role. I always have enjoyed playing as a soloist, and in some respects I regret that I haven't done as much of that as I might have done if I'd chanced it all and gone all out to try and be a soloist. But at the same time, the disciplines in music making and the understanding of music making that you get through playing chamber music is so universal that it applies itself very well to solo playing, to orchestral playing, to any part of music making you can imagine. And I remember that when I was a student, that people used to say to me, "Oh, you should play chamber music. You will learn so much in doing that." And I sort of said, "Yeah, okay, but I want to be a soloist." But now I realise the wisdom in what these people were saying.
Mm.
By the way, I have to go back to the beginning because I totally misrepresented myself. I actually started playing the cello when I was 7.
Oh,
Not 13.
I was going to say it was quite a late start and very fast.
Yeah, that my research was a bit out of out of whack there. Yeah.
Oh, well, that I think that might make some of us feel a bit better that you weren't winning awards competitions just 2 years ago. There was a little bit more work, but it does sound like.
No, the thing that was in my head actually was that I remember distinctly that at about the age of 12 or 13, I knew that that's what my career was going to be, music, regardless of whether it was solo playing or orchestral playing. That was my career path. And it was always interesting. It was even interesting to me at that time that my friends at school, none of them had any idea of what they were going to do, but I knew exactly what I was going to do.
Amazing. And you've stuck now with our Australian music scene for most of your career. Was there ever the draw, and we're very lucky you have, was there ever the draw to go overseas and follow, you know, potentially bigger opportunities in the big world?
Yeah, the closest I came to that was when I was studying in America. Because the first thing that happened to me when I went over there is I got that reality check where you go from being a big fish in a small pond to being one of many very fine fish in a much larger pond. And especially in Bloomington, Indiana, because that was like ground zero for great cello studying at the time. And so there were young cellists from all over the world who are all better than me by many, many factors. So, you know, when I got there, Starker sort of pointed out to me very quickly that I didn't know how to play the cello, but then he spent a year teaching me how to think about it. And by the end of the year, I was starting to think, yeah, I can stand shoulder to shoulder with these people. So I was once again getting this sense that I could do very well internationally. So that's, you know, if you look back on your life, which I can certainly start doing now, there are many points at which you took a particular road, but if you'd gone a different way, you know, a whole lot of different things would have happened. And in a sense, I've always thought it'd be great to be able to live your life about 6 or 7 times, because I've been so fortunate to have been offered these forks in the road at so many points in my life that could have taken me in so many different directions. Of course, like there were many reasons that I decided to base myself in Australia. Part of it was family life. I'd met a very lovely violinist by the name of Dimity Hall in the Australian Chamber Orchestra, and she was part of the many reasons that drew me back home. As I mentioned before, a lot of very experienced and smart people said, come back and join the Australia Ensemble. This will give you such a lot of experience, and it certainly has. And if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have been with that group as I have now for 31 years, and I wouldn't have been in the Golden String Quartet, which for a string player, being in a string quartet is such a valuable thing. And string quartets are always this sort of 1 in 100 chance that they're going to survive. And ours has survived, and has survived for 27 years. And that in itself is a really fantastic thing to have been able to do as a string player.
Definitely, most definitely. So you're here, you've been playing with the Australia Ensemble and the Golden String Quartet now for better years. Tell us, perhaps cast your mind back 18 months or 2 years pre-current situation. Can you tell us what your kind of day-to-day or your week-to-week looks like as a professional musician? What is it you do? What do you do with your everyday? What do you do with your practice? How often do you perform? Tell us about what it looks like.
How long have you got?
2 minutes.
Yeah, it's one of the things I've been very keen on from the very beginning of my career is to have my fingers in a lot of pies, actually. So going back to some of the decision making that I've made on my career path over the years, I've tended to shy away from any sort of job that would say, okay, you need to do this and this only. And with all due respect to the Australian Chamber Orchestra, which of course is a fabulous group and has just gone, you know, internationally ballistic, I left them because there was a movement at that time to make the orchestra full-time. And I was concerned that if I was full-time with the Australian Chamber Orchestra, I wouldn't be able to do smaller scale chamber music. I wouldn't be able to play as a soloist, and I wouldn't be able to teach. So the current, as I said, I've tried to keep that in my life, a lot of variety in what I do. And my day-to-day existence pre-COVID would be to, you know, periodically be working with the Australia Ensemble. We would get together 5 or 6 times a year to present particular projects, particular programs at the University of New South Wales. So that's always something that was sort of mapped out through the year. The Golden String Quartet, does a lot of concerts around the country, some recordings. We have regular festivals that we normally go to, such as the Australian Festival of Chamber Music in Townsville, which happens in late July. The Goldner Quartet over the last 10 or 12 years have been going to the UK every year to do a recording project for Hyperion. So that's always a big thing. And the other sort of leg, if you like, to my musical career is the strong teaching presence that I'm working on establishing, that I'm very interested in establishing at the Sydney Conservatorium. And for quite a few years, I was what's called a fractional appointee there, where I would teach like 7 or 8 students, which is considered to be a 50% load. But over the last couple of years, I've increased my load now to 100%. And as of this year, I've become the coordinator of cello there, which has a lot of administrative duties. So that's my weeks have become increasingly complicated and jigsaw-like. And I try to practice. I enjoy practicing, and in fact, the more difficult it is to find time to do something, the more you tend to enjoy it. So the 1 or 1.5 hours of practice that I manage to squeeze in every day, I always love it, and I still interestingly feel that 35 years later or 40 years later in playing the cello, I can improve. I found that in teaching, sitting watching young people learn how to play the cello gives me a sort of clarity to what they're trying to achieve, and then I turn it back on myself and I learn a lot from teaching and then apply it to my own playing. And in doing that, I'm sure I've improved the way I play. So I know I'm a far better player than I was when I came back from Starker. And I was pretty good then, but I have a lot of understanding of how to do things now. So yeah, day to day, there's a nice variety of stuff that does tend to get really squidged in. So I'm working very hard. And there'll be a couple of months a year where I just reel back in exhaustion and come to the beach and try not to do too much for a little while.
Great. Sounds wonderful. So there might be some people with us tonight who are thinking about pursuing a career in music. There's probably quite a lot that aren't necessarily thinking that. But I want to talk to you about what helped you to get where you are. And I'm sure there's things in this kind of conversation that will be relevant to those, thinking about any kind of career path. So what personal attributes do you think you have which have aided your career success?
Well, you mentioned luck. There have been a lot of fortunate things that have happened to me and that I've been able to take advantage of. But you cannot take advantage of these things unless you put a hell of a lot of hard work in there. And one of the things that I found in myself from the very beginning was a competitive streak. And again, it was interesting that I started in a small group of cellists. We started in a class of 8 cello players, and there were a couple that were competitive. And I just felt that if I worked really hard, I could be better than them. So I've always known at the beginning that if I work very hard, I can do well. There's also, I think, it's very seductive to when you do easy things like play a pizzicato line with an orchestra, or, when no one can hear you, to say, okay, that's easy, I don't need to work on it. But everything I've ever done, I've tried to do it as well as I possibly can, and I've spent time thinking about how do I achieve the best result. So I enjoy striving for quality, whether it's heard or not. And I think that sort of philosophy, if you just permeate everything you do with that people end up noticing that if we get this person to do something, they're going to do it really well. It doesn't matter how simple that task is; it's going to be very well done. all instrumentalists, they need to, of course, hopefully have had good teaching, but as I said, keep striving for that next step. Keep trying to improve yourself, because I'm here to say that you can improve indefinitely. And I practice a lot. I practice more. I shouldn't say this, but I practice more than some people I work with, and I often even ask myself the question, why do I practice so much? Why do I grab every minute and keep practicing when I've been playing for 40 years? And I probably wouldn't get that much worse if I didn't practice. But the answer is that when I practice, I get better. And if I practiced and I didn't get better, that would be the point at which I'd stop. But it intrigues me that I can still improve. So yeah, I mean, this age-old expression that being successful in music is 10% inspiration and 90% perspiration. So it's hard work. Put in the miles, work on technique. I think technique is such an important aspect of playing that we tend to want to sort of practice everything. We want to practice Dvorak cello concerto, but you can't play Dvorak cello concerto unless you've worked on the techniques involved. And I always had this feeling, for example, with Janos Starker, that I got the impression he never practiced repertoire. He just occasionally did a bit of technical work, and then the repertoire was all in his head. Mm. But because he had such a great command of the instrument, he could just play anything at any time.
Mm. What about, I'm interested in how you respond to knockbacks or setbacks or negative feedback or bad review or criticism. Have you had many of those in your life, and what's your way of responding to those? How do you personally deal with
that? Yeah, I've had some knockbacks. I've auditioned for positions. I've not been given them. I've had bad reviews. I think, this is an answer to many questions, that you're only as good as your last performance and you're only as bad as your last performance. So you just say, okay, well, that was that one. How do I do better next time? To be honest, I'm very hard on myself, and there are very few performances that I come off stage and think, gee, I did well. Mm. I'm always down on myself, and I think, in a sense, again, when I look at it in retrospect, I'm happy with that, because it's a bit like the practice thing. If I came off stage and I was happy, then I wouldn't be challenged by how the heck do I do better next time.
But it does seem like your response then to setbacks or potentially negative feedback is to actually just then work harder, which is obviously what's one of the things I think that's led you to where you are. Not rather than giving up, or to think, well, okay, work harder and make it better for next time.
Yeah, and I've been very fortunate in that this, I'm conscious that there are lots of great players through the world who don't have a job, and these auditions that they're doing are to get a job. I've always been in a situation, because I do this sort of multi-pronged career thing, that I have, this job currently with the Australian Ensemble, that's always been boiling along in the background. So if I've, for example, auditioned to be principal cello with the Sydney Symphony Orchestra and I don't get it, it's not that I don't have a job at the point that I don't get that job. When I've, toyed with the idea of doing this other part of a career and then decided myself not to do it, I've always got that backup. So I've been incredibly fortunate to have bases, professional bases on which to build my career that are the sort of some sort of support. Mm. And that's the big difficulty for musicians is that we could have this desire to be a soloist or a chamber musician or whatever, but at some point you have to be pragmatic about, I have to support myself financially. Mm. And that's when it becomes, okay, you've got to have a job somewhere. If you're a good player, you're going to need to get a job in an orchestra, hopefully. I mean, that's such a great thing to have. You might get a job teaching at a high school, teaching music. You might get an administrative job at an organisation like the ACO or Musica Viva or wherever, and still leave yourself that scope to perform, to play instruments. And I often work with community orchestras, and I think it's wonderful there. I find the enthusiasm of players in community orchestras often, far outstrips that of the people in the professional orchestras. Mm-hmm. The standard might not be the same, but the enthusiasm and the joy that people get out of playing their instruments with a group of like-minded people is such a wonderful thing to experience and be part of.
Mm-hmm. What about people who've contributed to your success? Have there been some key people that have helped you along the way and have made the difference in your career? Who were they? How did you find them? Tell us a bit about other help you've had.
Yeah, I'd have to say, like I mentioned earlier on, Charmian Gadd. Charmian Gadd and her husband Richard Goldner came to the Canberra School of Music when I was midway through my studies there, and Charmian had this tendency to draw the available good and enthusiastic young musicians around her, and we would have private concerts at her house, and she was very supportive. And as I said, she was the one that introduced me to a lot of the networks in Sydney, Kathy Selby, the members of the Australian Ensemble, and got my presence known in that sense. She was also, by the way, the one that introduced me to Janos Starker and got me to play for him. And again, there was this sort of miscommunications. I don't know if she actually knew that I was auditioning, but I didn't know I was auditioning. I just thought I was playing for him for a lesson. Another person that really supported me and I think very highly of, and was actually associated with the Australian Chamber Orchestra, was John Painter, who was one of the founders of the Australian Chamber Orchestra. And John, while I was studying in Canberra, became the director of the Canberra School of Music, and he also noticed me, and he and I got on very well. He was one of the people I sort of obliquely referred to in helping me come to the decision to basically join the Australian Ensemble. He was advising very strongly for it, and he said, "You'll gain a lot from that." And I've remained in contact with John up until this day, and he's always been a great supporter. There's another gentleman by the name of Ken Tribe who's not with us anymore, but he was a great supporter of music. He was a chairman of Musica Viva for many years, and Ken supported, among other things, my career. He often was, I found in retrospect that he was often the person that would sort of support my candidacy for certain things, or sort of throw my name into the mix with getting people to be aware of me. And he was a great supporter of the formation of the Goldner String Quartet, so he was very important. Richard Goldner as well. Richard, it was just great to know Richard. And Richard and Charmian were this team that really transformed the enthusiasm and the excitement that surrounded music in Canberra at that time. And then my colleagues in the Australian Ensemble, the people that were there that when I joined, and the people that have become members of it since then, I've learned such a lot working with them. I was very conscious when I joined the group that I was the youngest member of the group, and we used to make jokes about having a glass of milk for me in the corner and toys to play with, because I was about 20 years old when I joined. But no, I've learned such a lot from them, whether directly, them offering information to me, or just, learning how to interact with other people, because working in a chamber music setting, there's a hell of a lot of communication involved, and it's like board meetings every day. And learning how to give feedback and take feedback and not be offended by it, and be diplomatic but strong in your convictions, and all these sorts of things that are high level negotiation skills. And it's very interesting to me how different I am in that respect to the way I was 30 years ago. I could be really obnoxious back then.
Well, I've got one more question, and then we'll. I've got lots more questions, but I'll ask you one more. Leads us to, before we see if there's some student questions. With hindsight, are there any choices or decisions about your career that you would have made differently, given another chance? Is there anything you wish you'd done or didn't do?
Well, not to say I'm not happy where I am now. I'm very happy where I am now. But as I said, half an hour ago, that you'd like, in a sense, I've been so fortunate to have been offered so many potential other shiny things along the way, that I'd like to be able to, wouldn't it be great fantasy to be able to go back to the age of 20 and say, okay, this time I'm going to do that. This time I'm going to do that. And there were several, junctions at which, for example, I was at one point offered the principal cello position for the Sydney Symphony Orchestra quite early on. If I'd done that, I would have been in a very different place now. If I'd stayed in America studying with Starker and potentially gone to Europe and studied, I'd be in a very different place to where I am now. At one point, I was considering joining the Australian Opera and Ballet Orchestra as principal cello. And again, different place now. So it's looking back at your life and saying, okay, this is the tributary that I've gone down, but there are all these other tributaries that one might have gone down, and none of us are lucky enough to be able to live their lives 6 or 7 times, but wouldn't it be fascinating to do that and see where you ended up?
Would be. Well, flip side then, what is there something that's happened in your career, an event, a performance, or a moment that you are exceptionally proud of? What's your do you have one? Do you have a proudest moment you can tell us about? Something you're really proud that you...
Yeah, interesting one for us as string quartet players. The Everest for string quartets are the Beethoven string quartets. And there are 17 of them. And in 2004, we did what's called a Beethoven cycle, where we performed all of those string quartets. We performed them in 6 concerts over 3 weeks. And that, by any recognition of what it takes to be a string quartet, everybody will tell you that that's a real achievement to do those 17 string quartets over 3 weeks. And I remember at the time that I was 35 years old, and I thought, I've just done something that I could stop playing now and I could be proud of, and I've achieved something. That was a really special moment. The other really enjoyable, a couple of other ones. First one was in the Australian Youth Orchestra. We did a tour in 1988, and I was the principal cellist, and we did some amazing concerts in places in Europe. We played in the Concertgebouw in Amsterdam. We played music festivals in the south of France outdoors, and that was a really exciting period. The Australian Youth Orchestra at that time, and still is, fantastic orchestra of the best musicians from all around Australia, who are so enthused about what they're doing that they all practice their fingers off, and so that was really magical. And the other one for me was I played a Dvorak cello concerto with the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra in the Sydney Mire Music Bowl, which is this natural amphitheatre in Melbourne. And I played to about 15,000 people, and the audience went up to the horizon. And it was on a hot, January night, and there were seagulls flying overhead, and that was such a memorable occasion. That I'm very happy to have in my memory banks.
Oh, wonderful. They all sound wonderful, and I wish I was at all of them. Sure others feel the same. Now, it is nearly 1:45. We started about 5 minutes late, so I think we've got 5 or maybe 10 minutes, if you don't mind, Julian, to see if there's some questions from some students. Zia, are you there, or Alex, who's going to give us those questions? Otherwise, I can, I know there's one in the chat. We'll see if Zia's there.
Yep, hi, I'm here. I'm happy to give the questions.
Okay.
Hi, Julian. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule, obviously, to come and speak with us. The first question that we received prior to this webinar was, how do you deal with competitiveness and pressure in the music industry? I know you talked about you having a competitive streak, so I guess that would help. But otherwise, yeah, how do you deal with that pressure?
Yeah, it's a difficult thing. I think the moments where I felt the best about what I've done is when I don't look at what other people do. I don't compare myself with others. So because I can, just hypothetically, you might say, okay, there's a person that I studied with in Bloomington who is now playing solos all across Europe all the time. And I can say, oh, if only I'd done that, I can feel regretful about not having, competed with that. But at the same time, if I just look at what I've done and say, okay, I've been in one of Australia's finest string quartets for 26 years. I've been one of the most famous chamber groups with the Australian Ensemble for 31 years. I've got all these recordings. I'm very well known here. I'm happy if I look at what I have achieved. So I think you can sort of get trapped in sort of comparing yourself with what other people have done. But success in music, it's not so much being competitive, it's just being persistent. If you're going to audition for orchestras, you just have to do it over and over again. It's the reality is that it almost becomes a lottery at a high level, because it's very difficult for the orchestras to decide between 16 cellists who are all fantastic. But you just have to make sure that you're doing everything you can to be up at that level. So I guess that's how one deals with competitiveness.
Okay, thank you so much. I think that's very much applicable to a lot of industries as well, not just the music industry, just have persistence. What are your thoughts on further study in music beyond a bachelor's degree?
Well, it depends on what you're trying to do at that particular point. In my experience, at the conservatorium, the people that are going beyond the bachelor's degree are usually not the best players. The best players tend to get snapped up and get a job somewhere. So it's this funny thing that you end up, the people that end up getting a master's degree or a PhD, they're not necessarily the best players, but they might become the best educators. They might become, important within a university. So I think, in a sense, it's a different career path for a musician that, like it or not, is generally very well respected in all realms, apart from the sort of the performance side of things. An orchestra is not really interested in whether people have a master's degree or a PhD, but a university is, and a high school is. So I think it's an investment in your marketability in an education setting.
Okay, thank you. That's very interesting. Just one last question. If you could go back, right back to the beginning and pick a different instrument, which one would you choose and why?
That's an interesting one. One of the things that people say, isn't it great that you're a good cellist? I always think, I found the cello and it worked well for me. I had studied the piano for a couple of years and I was hopeless at it. So I was a really bad pianist. I was a good cellist, but maybe there's another instrument there that I would have been really fantastic at. Years. I'd be quite interested in a brass instrument, actually, because I've got a good set of lungs. My sister plays the French horn. She's in the medical profession now, but she still plays the French horn and enjoys it very much. And she plays in a couple of community orchestras around the country, and she's very well respected. And yeah, I think playing a brass instrument might be cathartic.
Is that the retirement plan? Then I was going to ask you, which we ran out of time for, but could you see yourself playing a trumpet in a community orchestra, or what's the plan? Are you playing cello?
I'll stick with the cello. I will play the cello until my friends tell me not to. The education side of things, you know, teaching at the conservatorium is I enjoy it. But it's also a really wise decision, I think, for my career path in the future, because if there is some point at which I become less desirable on the concert hall stage, my experience and my ability to teach hopefully won't be lessened. So that's a backup plan, as well as something I really enjoy doing.
Yes, wonderful. Well, we have unfortunately run out of time. There's so much more we could have asked. Thank you so much, Julian, for giving us your time and for speaking to us. I'm sure I speak on behalf of the students. If anyone wants to unmute and give Julian a round of applause, I'm sure that would be welcome, so that we know you're there. But certainly, can we hear anyone?
Well, thanks, Tara, and you're a fantastic interviewer. Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed talking with you.
Oh, you're very welcome. It was a wonderful thing to do on a cold lockdown Tuesday night. So thank you very much. I hope you've all got something out of that. I certainly got lots out of that conversation, and I'm well into my career as well. So thank you again, Julian. Thank you to the students. Thank you to the Music Performance Unit for setting this up. And if you do want to know about any more events that the Music Performance Unit are running, make sure you go to the website, which is, I believe, music.unsw.edu.au, and they're looking for more events and opportunities for all of you students there. So thanks very much, and hopefully we'll see you again soon, and hopefully we're all rehearsing and playing together in the near future as well. Thanks, everyone.